Welcome to Music Ed Tech Talk, a podcast exploring music, education, technology, and the intersections between them, with a special focus on the productive and the creative process. I'm your host, Robby Burns. Last week on Music Ed Tech Talk.
I feel like the last year-ish of Adam Neely, he has really stepped up his level of critical thinking about the things that he's talking about. And I think it's probably because he's gotten a lot of tweets from people with higher degrees in music theory, because he used to get a lot more stuff wrong. And those videos are still up there, but he would often oversimplify to the point of not being useful anymore. And oversimplification, as you know, is an important teaching technique, but he would take it a little too far sometimes. And he doesn't do that, I don't think, nearly as much as he used to. And I will give him credit. I at first kind of poo-pooed his lengthy look into music theory's white racial frame with Phil Ewell as just like a YouTube regurgitation of Phil Ewell's original paper, but he actually does do some extra commentary on it that I think is valuable, and I think it was great that he got Phil involved through a huge portion of that, and it's such an important topic. I also think that I was a little bit too dismissive at first of the value he brings to it by bringing so much extra attention and reach to the issue by putting it on an Adam Neely video than Phil Ewell is going to get from the 2019 Society of Music Theory plenary session, or an article in Music Theory Online. So I think I was originally a little bit dismissive of that, and in retrospect, that was wrong of me. And he did actually a very, very good job with that particular video, and has been doing much more interesting things, not starting with that video, but starting from around that time that I think he had been doing in the previous few years.
Yeah.
My favorite...
I would
sorry, go ahead. I was going to say my favorite music theory nerdy YouTube channel is 12 Tone.
I like that one. Yeah. I like that. They have a Discord that I'm a member of, but I don't really ever open it.
I'm a Patreoner of theirs, and I am not in the Discord. Maybe I'm not at the... I may not be at the level.
I'm not. No, it's free.
Oh, really?
The Discord is free. There might be channels that are paid, but I am in the Discord, and I'm not a supporter.
All right. Well, I will check out the 12-Tone Discord. I have voted on what he should analyze in videos, and I did vote for the Dolly Parton one that he did last month.
That's a good one. Yeah, I was gonna cut all of this out, but now I feel like if anyone doesn't know any of these channels, they're definitely
his stuff that he's been doing over the last 8 to 12 months on, or it's been more like 2 years now, on loop theory, which is a relatively recent kind of thread of scholarship on how 4-chord and 4-measure loops work in contemporary post-millennial pop music, is actually fascinating. And he's not doing... this is one place where he has done kind of original theoretical work, but even if he didn't, it would still be very interesting, because a lot of people don't think about it in the terms that make sense for this kind of music. It does not behave the way that tonal music behaves. Yeah. Sorry, that's a tangent. We could talk about that sometime too.
We should. Well, should we talk about it next week?
Sure, we can talk about it next week. That sounds good to me.
Speaking of YouTube music theory sensations, yeah, you mentioned the theory of loop theory and 4-chord patterns. What's the name of the one pop music theorist who has that idea? Because one of the things I watched recently that was on Adam Neely's channel was the one about what key is Sweet Home Alabama in.
Which is way more interesting than it had any right to be.
It is super interesting, although I take issue with... So I'm a believer in the key of G, which he spends most of the video trying to convince you is wrong, ultimately concluding that it is wrong. But then right after concluding that it's wrong and that it's actually in the key of D, he says, but you're probably wondering what scale you should use to solo over it, and you should use the G major or the G pentatonic scale. And I'm like, what? I don't understand how you can spend this whole video arguing it's in the key of D and then tell me, I don't know how the members of Sweet Home Alabama think about or talk about.
Is it Sweet Home Alabama?
Internalize.
I thought it was something else.
Oh, Leonard Skinner. Sorry, did I say the members of Sweet Home Alabama?
No, but I thought it was a different song.
The song, it's Sweet Home Alabama.
I need to check this because I think it's something else.
Adam Neely also does a video on what key is Hey Joe.
Maybe I was thinking of Hey Joe.
Which he concludes, although it like borrows tons of chords outside of the key of E minor, he concludes that it is in E, but he doesn't say minor. He says it's sort of just generally in the key of E, borrowing from major, minor, lots of other ideas. But that is a song that I firmly believe, I needed no convincing that it was in the key of E. I've always thought of that song in the key of E. Sweet Home Alabama.
I haven't thought about the key of Sweet Home Alabama before, but it's whatever note the guitar lick ends on. That's clearly tonic. When you arrive at the thing after the first phrase of the lyric, whatever that note is, that's clearly tonic.
It's G.
Okay.
It's G. And he and the whole video advocates that instead of the chord progression going 5 4 1, that it goes 1 flat 7 4, and like here are the reasons why I can totally get behind it being in D. Well, even though I disagree. Reason number one is yes, there is definitely a history of rock music using the flat 7 chord. Fine, totally fine.
Also, there's a huge history of rock music that goes 5-4-1 because the blues.
Exactly. So there's also a huge history of, the 4 being sort of like a resting point in rock. And he points to the live version of the song where they end on a really, really long, where they do it, I forget if there is an agreed upon term for this, but where like a rock band plays the last chord and they smash over it for like anywhere between, a couple of extra seconds to a couple of extra minutes. Mm-hmm. But basically in the live version, they rest on G, which some people argue is the tonic, a reasonable place. But there are tons of instances of bands ending a song on the 4 chord to create a little bit of suspense or a feeling of maybe not quite as much resolution. It happens all the time. So I totally understand how he could say that, okay, the fact that they end on a G chord doesn't mean that it's the tonic. Then you start listening to like all of the content of their solos and like the melody of the song, and it just, to me, the G chord is where it feels like it's most at rest. And he kind of goes through, this is the part that I mentioned about this theorist. I can't remember in the video, I'll link the video to the show notes of this episode, but I can't remember the theorist's name.
The guy that's kind of credited with starting the whole conversation around 4 chord and 4 measure loops is Philip Tagg.
That's who I'm thinking of, yeah. And the idea is, which honestly is super interesting to me, and also takes me from a place of firmly believing that the song is in G to firmly believing that it is not strictly in G, is this idea of rock and popular music sort of using these 3 or 4 chord loops and maybe having like sort of a moving center of tonality. Like the best example I can think of is like songs that are in like a major key. Like if you bought the Hal Leonard arrangement of a song and it was like listed as the major key, even though it might like sort of deceptively go from a 5 to a 6 chord numerous spots, the 6 chord might even be on the downbeat of measure 1 of the loop, even though there's like no like raised leading tone or anything. Like you might reasonably say that it's in a minor key because it rests on a minor chord. You might call it modal. You might do any number of things, but I love this idea that like the minor chord, like the 6 chord and the 1 chord can both sort of be moments of rest, and there's more of like a loop that's not like necessarily all centering around one key area. You're the guy with the degree in this.
The thing that I think Neely, to bring him back up, does very well in his Hey Joe, what key is Hey Joe in video is, and this is I think a thing that should probably have been a part or more a part of the Sweet Home Alabama video, is that it may not be important what key it is in. It may not, that for this style of music may not be a valuable question to ask about certain kinds of music the way it is a critical question to ask about, Beethoven. It may actually be somehow taking Skinnerd or taking another song and looking at it through the German nationalist framework of tonal music theory, and not on its own terms. And I think that's the really important piece of scholarship that has begun to gain more currency among music theorists studying popular music, are just the idea of what questions do we ask about this music, what is a valuable observation, and that may or may not have anything to do with the sorts of questions that we would ask about Haydn string quartets. And that should, if we are reasonable scholars following the principles that we claim to hold important in music theory, such as music theory following practice, not the other way around, that music theory is built to describe a corpus of music that musicians created, not that musicians employ a music theory to make their compositions, though certainly some do. And I think that is a much more interesting set of questions that has a much more interesting set of answers and has been the subject of a lot of recent scholarship. I just saw a conference paper by a theorist named Iran, who is proposing a different set of describing tonic, and that some like distinguishing between relative keys in certain, especially post-millennial pop music, may not actually be a very useful distinction, and it may be useful to consider them to simultaneously hold both tonics. Both, in the case that you're talking about, both G and E may both be important enough to the song at all times. Not that it bounces between G and E, but both are in place at the same time, might actually be a useful way to think about tonic. Now, I'm not sold completely on her, I actually don't know the gender of this theorist. I'm not sold completely on their number system that they use to describe harmony in pop music, but I think it's a really interesting question about what tonic is in popular music and whether that is even a thing that is worth talking about. I think is pretty interesting.
I find that the discussions that revolve around popular music theory and also the sometimes associated opinion that Western music theory should just be burnt to the ground in order to like rebuild first. I around these discussions, I always have to think to my own background in music theory, and like I don't know, I just think that the tools that are taught in a like a kind of a classical performance kind of setting, I don't think that the curriculum is very balanced or focuses on the right things, and it certainly portrays a very, very limited set of musical ideas and understandings as like elitist for sure. But I keep coming back to like they're still useful tools to me. Do you know what I mean? Like they instruct me how to listen critically to the things that I'm interpreting. And when I took the one thing that I will say is like most of my colleagues who have like musical performance degrees, especially in percussion, don't typically study jazz to the same degree that I did. And when I started taking jazz coursework in my master's degree, which is not in jazz, but I was a full-time student, so I took some, I filled my schedule with as much music as I possibly could. And I mean, you take a jazz theory class, and the whole thing is like you're everything you're talking about is like framed from the perspective of what you're hearing. Like you're always talking about what you hear. You're always listening to recordings. You're always talking about the extensions as like how they add color or emotion to the chord. Like you're never removing the improvisational or the listening process from what you're actually looking at on the page. And rhythm notation is still extremely important. And for the record, lots of jazz theory and arranging is still built around like similar functional ideas that you would see in like an undergraduate theory course. I mean, like I've talked about 2/5 more in my one semester of jazz theory than I did probably in all of my 3 semesters, because I did 3 semesters of music theory 1, music theory 2, 3, and then I did like an atonal theory class. And just the amount of 2/5. So I don't know. I mean, these are not pointless tools to me, but I think there's definitely room for more. I just ask myself as a teacher of students who are at the middle school level. I did a tweet. Did you read my tweet thread?
No, I did not. I'm sorry. I missed it.
From yesterday, I did a little tweet thread. I'm not a big threader, but I'm teaching a general music class, and I'm doing a remix assignment where I rip the vocal line of a pop song that they vote. We all contribute some pop songs, and then we vote on one, and then for that week, that's like the remix track of the week. And then I rip the vocal line from the rest of the recording, put it in a Soundtrap template, set the time signature and the key signature so that all the loops will be matched to the key of the song, and then I push it out to them in our LMS so that it's like a fail-proof thing for them. Well, you would think. So what are the most interesting arrangements that I get submitted? They're the ones where students have either a very advanced understanding of form or harmony. Now, in the case of my most recent assignment, which I posted an example of a student submission to Twitter, I limited them and I said, you have to use all of the exact same loops for every verse, for every chorus, and for every pre-chorus of the song, which we had already analyzed the lyrics of the song. It was a Panic at the Disco song. So, and my tweet thread is basically getting at this this challenge of like, the kids who did the best work clearly are hearing how the harmony of these different sound trap loops, which are, they're all like pianos and synthesizers and bass loop, it's all like rock and pop loops, but they're the ones who are hearing both the potential conflicts in the melody of the singer versus the harmony of the loops, and they're the ones who can hear which loops have like a harmonic progression that like emotionally supports whatever is going on in that vocal line, or has like a forward momentum, or creates a sense of calm or intensity. So to me, I'm thinking to myself, like, all of the theoretical teaching practices that I know are like, there are lots of different entry points into music theory, but the best way that I know to take a student from zero knowledge to lots of knowledge is only in one direction, and that's the one that I did in college. And that's why it's extraordinarily difficult, in fact, impractical, to fit into a middle school general music class. But it's like, how do I get to the point where we're in the guitar method book and we're playing songs that have 1s and 5 chords? Like, I can get from that step to, okay, now we're going to compose an 8-measure C major melody where we put chord tones on the downbeat and then use an appropriate use of passing neighboring tones. Believe it or not, 8th graders can do that and make real nice, pleasing, functional melodies. But this song is exactly like, which it's loop based. It's a 4-chord progression. So any loop they add in Soundtrap is going to have to somehow work in that context. And general music, I'm going on a crazy tangent, but we're talking music theory. So here we go. So general music is, at the middle school level, is a place where it's like, the curriculum is so fragmented. It's just like lots of little grab bags of different experiential lessons and tools and musical concepts, but I don't understand how to thread them together. And this is kind of a frustration for me, is because I really think that as a engaged songwriter, you should know these tools, and I don't know how to equip them at all.
I think you're thinking about the right things, and I think it's something that I think about as I think about revisions that I want to make to my university music theory curriculum. And we have to really consider deeply and thoroughly what music theory is and what music theory is for. It is not, and this is how I was taught it as well, music theory is not so you can write a bunch of Roman numerals under a staff of a Mozart piano. Like, that's not valuable to anybody. If you pick up a copy, God, heaven forbid anybody actually picks up a copy of the music theory spectrum or something like that and opens it, you're not going to find a bunch of scores with Roman numerals underneath them. If you go to a university and knock on the music theory professor's door, they're not sitting in their office putting Roman numerals under Beethoven piano sonatas. That's not what music theorists do, and that's not really a valuable pursuit. It's valuable maybe as practice to get you thinking in certain ways and along certain lines, but what really analysis is a way of showing a way, speaking of what you said about your jazz studies, a way of hearing music. And when you listen to music theorists talk about their analyses, one of the phrases that you'll hear all the time is, I hear this as doing this. So they'll talk about how they hear it, even if they're not literally like hearing a performance. They'll describe something in the score as, oh, I hear this as a chord that does this and connects in these ways, or I hear this as a reflection of the motive that was presented back in measure 7 or whatever. And it's important to note that it is, again, hearing music, but it is not the way of hearing music. It is a way of hearing music. And the thing to keep in mind that I think we probably all glossed over in our graduate studies, in our brushes with critical theory, in whichever ways we brushed against it, is that all of these theories can say something about a music, but not any one of them is going to be complete, and every one of them is going to have its limitations. And applying the music theories of, 17th, 18th, 19th century German, Austrian, maybe French, if you're very lucky, Italian and English composers to the music of Radiohead is not going to necessarily describe everything that is worth mentioning about Radiohead. Not everything that's interesting, not everything that's valuable, not everything that is, to use a very loaded word, complex about that music is going to be very well described using a system of Roman numeral analysis that was derived even after the fact, to describe something like Beethoven. And so that's a really important thing to keep in mind, is that just because we have this set of tools for analyzing music and they describe some things that music does very well, we should not think that we are describing everything that is interesting about that music. The other thing that I'll point out, you mentioned your jazz studies, and I think this is a common trap to fall into. It's one that I fall into all the time. I just actually assigned my students to write a contrafact of I Got Rhythm this week to show me that they understand embellishing tones and use embellishing tones in this contrafact. Or it wasn't it was something else. It doesn't matter. I think a common trap to fall into is to assume that the music theories that apply readily to jazz apply to other popular musics, and I think that is a false equivalency that we're making. Jazz certainly is more closely related to rock, and rock is more closely related to pop and hip hop, but they are all still different in some important ways, and a lot of the ways that those musics are put together may be informed by the way jazz works, but it may not be, and we need to make sure that the theories that we apply to Panic at the Disco, or that we apply to Katy Perry or CeeLo Green or whatever, that those theories are as valid to that music as they are to the music that they come from. And that's not always the case. And I think that's an interesting thing that is being explored currently by popular music analysis right now. So people are looking at things like loops that are not necessarily functional in the way that harmony is functional in other musics. Even 2/5s. When you talk about 2/5s, you're talking about functional harmony. Not in that doesn't necessarily behave that way. Those twos don't necessarily go to 5 in pop music, and those 5s certainly don't necessarily go to 1 in pop music. And so those tools may not be valuable. And the most important thing, to take yet another step back, harmony may not be the most important framework, or even an important framework for describing a lot of what's going on. Another person whose name comes up sometimes in these conversations, music theorist Megan Lavengood, who is perhaps a neighbor of yours. She teaches at George Mason, and she has done research on timbral analysis, specifically regarding 80s synthesizers and how those impacted the music that they were used in. And so there's a lot of people that are looking into how rhythm works, how form works, how different kinds of cycles through different parts of form work, how timbre works, how technology impacts all of this, how transmission through various media impact the reception of these things. And heaven forbid we as people analyzing music deal with the lyrics in any meaningful way either. And that's also an important part of a lot of this analysis as well. So that is all to not discount the experience of people who have degrees in music theory and have a lot of training in writing Roman numerals under the staff of a Beethoven piano sonata or a Bach chorale or whatever. But it's also not to say that is necessarily the best tool for dealing with every kind of music just because it happens to describe Bach really well. It happens to describe Bach really well because it was invented to describe Bach very well, not the other way around.
Yeah, great. All great stuff. Megan's a great Twitter follow, by the way.
Yes.
And also, have you listened to Will Robbins' podcast, Sound Expertise?
I have not.
Have you heard of it?
I have not. I know of Will, and
Okay.
I know of his scholarship a little bit, but I have not listened to his podcast.
It's real good. Yeah, it's a musicology show, and it's seasonal. Is that how you describe a show of any kind that has seasons? Can I say it's seasonal? Sure. She's on one of the episodes of the first season to talk about her research in 80s synthesizer and timbre and all of that stuff, and it's a super interesting listen. There's also some fun facts about the game Sonic the Hedgehog 3, which was my childhood.
Yeah, I think she also does a lot of, if you want to get real fancy and impress people at a cocktail party, when we can have cocktail parties again, talk to them about ludomusicology. That is the musicology of game music. So anyway, she does a fair amount of game music analysis stuff, I know.
Yeah, I'll link her Twitter and that episode of that podcast.
For sure. I'm here for it.
Notes. Would you say, I want to move on, but would you say that at a real top level? Because I know that there's lots of super problematic stuff that Schenker wrote, but at a top level, and I know that this is maybe my own perspective. I mean, isn't that what we're talking about? Everyone's perspective, everyone's experience of listening like their life experience sort of just tints the way that they look at and listen to music, but also their world. And I know that doesn't like, that's not to say that like Schenker didn't say some things that were like, that deserve obvious criticism, but at a real top level, my takeaway from all Western theoretical analysis, like this insistence that things go to a 5 and then a 1, and maybe some other stuff to get to 5. Like, this insistence to me never was like, I never interpreted it as a rule book. I certainly, maybe there are ways where like some elitism about understanding music that way got under my subconscious, but like to me, the idea of a 5 going to a 1 and the insistence on that is not an insistence on that the notes of a 5 triad need to go to the notes of a 1 triad. It's more so an insistence on that things need to leave a home base and then come back home, or things need to have some sort of tension and resolution in the music, even if it is not in the harmony itself.
I tend to agree with you, but I think there are like Arvo Pärt would disagree with that, right? Arvo Pärt doesn't go anywhere. It just is, right? And the thing that I think that you're describing about, you know, the way we talk about music and music theory is like needing to do a thing, that is actually a thing that Schenker would have said. Schenker would have said that music that does not submit well to his theories is not good music, and the evidence of that is that it does not submit well to his theories. So music that does not fit certain frameworks in his eyes was just not good, and in some ways was, however you want to describe it, anything from, you know, uneducated to degenerate, and he did sometimes even use those terms and worse ones to describe music that did not fit his frameworks and models.
Yeah, I certainly don't think that anyone's frameworks or models should be like just, you know, jammed into, you know, any kind of different context.
When the thing that's challenging for the modern discipline of music theory today in 2021 as we're speaking is that a lot of other scholarship built on Schenker's theories and related theories that have a lot of problems associated with them by contemporary standards. And the thing that I think is going to take years, literally years, maybe decades to work itself out is what we can take from those and apply in new ways, in ways that are still useful, that don't carry, and they're going to have their own baggage, but we would like for it to carry different baggage than you know, reading Schenker's work.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to leave it there.
Fair.
Let's talk about forScore for the Mac.
Yes, finally, our long national nightmare is over. We don't have to, you know, continue to you know, dream about forScore on a large screen as we have for many years. We actually can have it on a large screen.
Can I stand on my forScore soapbox for like 2 minutes?
Hit me. I've been talking way too much already.
I wanted you to. I mean, I wanted to. I've been wanting to talk about music.
That music theory thing, like you like wound up a little wind-up toy and just let me go for 25 minutes.
Well, it's something that I'm thinking about a lot, and I just, you know, not everything. That was why I like tweeted a bunch about this subject in relationship to what I'm doing in the classroom. Because one, I was like, probably for a lot of teachers out there who are using Soundtrap this year, they're not doing that kind of a project-based thing, and it is instantly engaging to students and is cool, and it demos well on Twitter. You know, a little 30-second clip of a song a student of mine made, cool. So like, I shared it for that reason, but then I also was just like, yeah, but this needs to be, I just need to get some thoughts out and throw them out into the universe. And I really like, I tend to, it's a lot easier to brand my internet content, whether written or on the show, as like things that are easier to talk about, like things that are more like technical. I guess I can't call speaking technical writing, but you know what I mean? Like things, like it's easy to say like, this is what Devin Think or Evernote, like what an app is and what it does and how I use it. Like that's easy. Theory is a little murkier. You can offend people more easily. I don't need people like adding me on Twitter for any reason or another, but I just, it's on my mind, and there are sides of my musicianship that are like just not, I'm not putting out into public that need to, because in some cases, like in the case of musical like performance and pedagogy, like there's a lot of that stuff that's like not getting onto this podcast or my blog that should be, but I just, you know, have internalized it, and it's like my everyday thing. I guess it's not as novel to talk about. I don't know. I guess this is a long way of saying music theory getting 30-minute tangent from us is long overdue. So
I'm here for it. So tell me about forScore.
So-
Hit me up with your forScore hot takes.
Well, before we even talk about forScore for the Mac, so there was an episode of a podcast that I know you listened to. I'm pretty sure it was The Talk Show by John Gruber, which is sort of a technology, somewhat Apple-centric show that's great. I'll try to find the exact episode and link it, but the co-host was Ben Thompson, who is a great tech writer, and they were talking about the iPad, and just kind of like talking about how the iPad has like sort of struggled to, like, as it continues to become more and more useful as a laptop replacement, how it, you know, it doesn't really have as like defined a place. Like the iPhone operating system is like very, very good at what it does. The Mac operating system is very, very good at what it does. Well, what makes the iPad very, very good at what it does? And so much of it has to do with the form factor of it. And they got on this like tangent about when the GarageBand app for iPad was introduced and how so many things made so much sense on this giant touch surface. Like, you want to play a piano? Well, just put a giant piano on the screen. You can tap it right with your fingers. You want a guitar? Here's a six-string guitar, and this is your input for a MIDI instrument. And I was thinking to myself, like, what are the apps in my life that actually require an iPad to be in my work? Like, I can't, like, not that I want to do this kind of work on iPad, but I really can't do it on the Mac or on the iPhone. And very few apps fall into this category, and forScore is, like, right at the top of this list as an app that is pretty much best served by a paper-sized display, something that you interact with your fingers, something that's dominantly a reading experience, but that the integration of the Apple Pencil for annotation just sweetens the deal. Like, it is the perfect reader. It's always behaved as a really good iPad citizen. Like, it uses a lot of design cues from Apple's own productivity apps. It has a distinctive style, but it just, to me, it's like they've borrowed the iOS design language style in a way where, honestly, like, if Apple made an app that read PDFs and lets you like scribble like flat signs and, you know, add musical metadata to it, I feel like it would look a lot like forScore. They've just really knocked it out of the park. And so that's kind of my starting point for a forScore discussion, is that it has always been an iPad first app. However, there are some things that the iPad is not really good at. File management.
That's the biggest one for me, is file management. I mean, file management, external displays, but those are the big ones for me. I don't know if there's anything in particular that I would need forScore to do that emphasizes those. But yeah, I mean, if nothing else, forScore is a way of viewing a file that you have somewhere, and so getting files into it is a mess. And then, of course, a big part of using forScore is organizing your files, which I'm not sure is totally solved by the Mac version. But anyway, jumping the gun.
I kind of want to, I'm still thinking about maybe writing something on my blog about forScore for Mac. I've kind of waited because, you know, when it came out in the fall. It's been out for a little while now, and they were pretty forthright that they were also planning a feature that would allow it to sync between the iPad. And this is one of those things. It's like, what is a Mac better at than an iPad? File management. You can just fiddle around, you know, you can have the Finder open on one half the screen, forScore on the other. You can hold the command key down and click just the files you want and then drag them right into it with the precision of a mouse. Like, you can batch edit stuff more cleanly. It's just got a little bit more control. It's an obvious place to do that kind of work, which if you have a big library like I do, I mean, I have a lot of my band scores. I have my entire percussion private teaching library of method books in there, tons of real books that are indexed by song title, just a lot of stuff that I depend on. So a really, really big library. And I needed an easier way to edit data. So the Mac version comes along right around the time that I'm teaching virtually at the start of this fall. And the syncing was announced, but we didn't know when it was going to come out. It seemed like probably some months were going to pass before it would happen. So what I did was I copied my library to the Mac, and I kind of just made my Mac the hub of all things forScore. I figured I'm not going on any gigs. I have enough stuff in the iPad that I can just leave my iPad library as is and experiment with the Mac version, do some, you know, see how it operates, see how smooth it is, add a bunch of files, you know, whatever. And then more recently, like just within the past couple of weeks, I have, you know, turned on the syncing to iCloud feature, and now it's syncing across, you know, the Mac and then the iPad. And then the iPhone is, again, another place where I wouldn't think to use an app like forScore, but it's just every now and then I need to just reference something real quick, and my phone is all that's on me. And, you know, I'm not going to, like, in those moments, I'm trying to be fast, so it's only useful to me if everything that I have added to my library is already there. So iCloud, adds that. This is using this Mac app is using the Catalyst technology, which allows developers to port iPad apps to the Mac. So it in many ways looks like an iPad app. I'm guessing that, I mean, you are like, you've written a bunch for Scoring Notes, the blog, about, a variety of notation kinds of apps for the iPad. I mean, I've definitely been using forScore on the Mac in practice every day since the fall. I mean, I guess I just was figuring gosh, this is a long introduction. I just figured we could talk about how the experience is of using it on the Mac.
Yeah, so I've used it only very minimally on the Mac because I was frustrated by the lack of sync, and I didn't really have a great use for it. I'll say, like a lot of Catalyst apps that use this technology to bring an iPad app over to the Mac, it's a little weird. Like there's some places where it clearly feels like you're, I don't know, controlling some other person's finger to operate the app by using a mouse or a trackpad on it. But having said that, it's really nice to be able to interact with the library there, to add scores by dragging them in from the Finder and whatnot. So I definitely value having forScore here on my Mac, but I still am just not, I don't know, it feels like when I'm using it, I'm strangely interacting with, I don't know, like I'm airplaying from an iPad to this thing, and it just doesn't. There's something that feels not right about it, and I can't put my finger on it. Do you have that feeling?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because there are times that. So one of the other apps that I've been using a lot this year is AirServer, which allows me to stream my iPad screen to the Mac. And sometimes what I'll do is I'll just put the AirServer window on the screen of my Mac that I'm sharing to my students, and then whatever I do on the iPad is visible. And there are times where I do get frustrated enough with the clicking and pointing interactions in the Mac app on forScore where I think to myself, you know what, I'm just going to put this on my iPad and then stream it to my Mac and then have them see, and then I can circle and highlight things live and they'll see it happen. And I'll be able to do it with the precision of the Apple Pencil, which is a very, very precise tool. Yeah, I mean, it's tough because I think you click, there are different paradigms for navigating a multi-page PDF document on the Mac and on the iPad. I think of, a PDF app for the Mac, something as simple as Preview, which everyone knows Preview, or PDF Expert, or one of, just a standard PDF reading app. Well, what are the ways that you turn a page in a PDF app? Well, I personally swipe on my trackpad or my mouse. If I'm side scrolling from in a page view and the screen is zoomed in, what happens? It still scrolls to the next page. But because forScore is used to being fixed to the window size of the iPad, since it was designed as a full screen app, it has a little bit of a different interaction. Like if the whole screen is not visible, like if you zoom in on iPad and then you tap the right side of the page or you do the gesture to turn the page, what it will do is before turning to the next page, it'll scoot down so that you can see whatever is on the bottom of the document, and then you have to swipe again to turn the page. So I run into this weird situation on the Mac where if my window, because one of the benefits of the Mac is you can resize a window. Who would have thought?
And that's one thing that forScore for the Mac does better than a lot of other Catalyst apps, is that you actually can resize the window and it changes the document view.
Right. But if my window is not the exact right dimensions of my score and I swipe on my trackpad to turn the page, I get this annoying little moment where if there's just a couple of pixels of undisplayed PDF at the bottom, it'll just move a little and then I have to, swipe again. Or the very notion of tapping, or in this case, clicking on the right and the left side of the screen to turn the page, or exposing more tools, exposing more metadata by clicking in the center of the document rather than by some other means. That's something that on the iPad, it makes sense to tap the middle of the screen because your finger is already interacting with the screen. But on the Mac, it's just it just kind of throws you off a little bit just because it's not how other Mac apps behave.
It's very weird. I would expect that just to be around all the time, right? I don't know.
You'd think. Well, one nice thing that the Mac app has is, and you can, at WWDC, the Apple Developer Conference last year, they made a big push for iPad developers to utilize the larger screen of the iPad Pro. So one of the big pushes was a lot of Apple apps now have a persistently visible left sidebar where you can see more information on the screen at once. And forScore has done this on the Mac, because apparently if you implement a sidebar, you can make it so that when you publish your iPad app as a Mac app, it like the sidebar automatically looks like a Mac OS sidebar, because sidebars on the Mac are stylized. They have a different user interface than on the iPad, even though they're a little different. Like there's that whole like on the Mac, if I'm in the Photos app and I'm like scrolling through my list of photo albums, it's got that sort of like transparency behind it, like where if it's over top a window of our Zoom call right now, for example, I would like see your face through the list of my albums. Whereas on the iPad, it's just like a white background with little icons representing your different albums and then like black text. But anyway, all of this is to say that forScore does allow you to use a persistently visible sidebar on the Mac, which is kind of nice when you have the screen space to do it, to basically just always have a list of your scores open one click away. Do you experience a lot of crashing with the Mac version?
I have not experienced a lot of crashing with the Mac version, and I do have some pretty hefty documents in there. I probably have fewer annotations than you, since I'm not usually teaching from it. I feel like if I was teaching from it, I would be marking stuff in it a lot more than if I were just performing from it.
Yeah. I've gotten quite a few beach balls, but also my computer is showing some.
I do occasionally get weird things, like if I resize the window, a button will get a little spinner on it. Like if you resize the window, and maybe it's not the button, maybe that's just where the spinner occurs for the whole document. But if you resize the window, notice the library button, there's a little spinner that pops over it. And I don't know if that's specifically to tell you that the library is doing something, or just that's where they put the spinner. You know what I mean? It's very weird.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought. So, I like most Catalyst apps, I'm glad I would rather have them on the Mac than to not have them. I'm trying to think of other ones that I use. Do you use any other?
This is the only one. Well, that's not true. I do use GoodNotes as a Mac app, to return to our favorite topic.
My other one. Yeah.
And yes, it is not a good Mac app, but it is better than not having a Mac app. And in fact, I would even say that it's better than the old version of the GoodNotes Mac app, which was not a Catalyst app, just because it has all of the features, or at least most of the features of the iPad app, which the old Mac app did not. So I do appreciate having it, and I do sometimes use it. Having said that, I just find it to be less reliable in lots of ways, and I have basically phased it out of most of my uses. And there are a lot of things that it does that are really weird in the way that they stick to the like iPad navigation systems. Like it's not... Like, for example, one thing, and this would make sense for forScore as well, to have multiple windows open, because you've got a whole library of documents there. Wouldn't it make sense to have two forScore windows, and then you can command tilde between those two windows of the same application? It would make a lot of sense to put like 3 different GoodNotes notebooks on different parts of your giant 27-inch display, but that's not an option. There's nothing like that. So yeah, there's some weirdnesses with the Catalyst framework, but like you said, I'd rather have GoodNotes and forScore on my Mac than not. And it's, I think, a starting point. I think Catalyst generally in a lot of ways is a starting point, and I hope it gets better.
Yeah, I'm with you. And GoodNotes is the only other Catalyst app I have on my dock. And yeah, things that come to mind that are weird are like, if I see a thumbnail of a file I want to open, any other Mac app would have me double click that to open it.
Right.
But GoodNotes is expecting me to basically simulate a tap. So it's a single click, and it just throws me every time. Like creating a new document is I have to just click on this like new button which is a square with a plus sign in it. Yeah, it just folders again don't double click, they single click. Yeah, it's funky. But again, yeah, you conclude it with basically how I feel. Yeah, but I would rather have it. Have you used the Broadcasts app for the Mac?
No, I didn't know it existed. As in Stephen Troughton Smith's Broadcast?
Yeah, so he is a developer of many fine Mac and iOS apps, and this is basically just a radio player where you can listen to internet radio stations by typing in a URL, and then, it's an audio player. It just, in the same way that Apple's Podcasts app for the Mac looks and behaves a lot like iTunes used to, but I'm pretty sure that one is built as a Catalyst app, right? Isn't that?
I don't know.
I'm pretty sure that I'll do the research, but I'm pretty sure it is. So Broadcasts, well, I should conclude on Podcasts. So the Podcast app really does like if you didn't know any better, you would think it was a native Mac app that was written first for the Mac. It feels and looks like it belongs. And the broadcast app is a real good, because the broadcast app is like pretty much stealing every design cue from iTunes that there is. It's got, it really like looks exactly the same, but you would never know. I guess a single click on a radio station opens it instead of a double click, but I'm pretty sure that a single click in the music app takes you to the album view too. So I guess that's consistent with how. Also, one of these days I want to do a whole show on the music app.
You seem to have a lot of thoughts on it.
More than you would think are necessary. Did I tell you? So when Paul Kafasis, he works with Rogue Amoeba apps. He was on this show a while back in like December. I'll link that in the show notes. All of their apps are audio based. And I said, you know what? I don't know how it came up. I didn't intend to bring it up, but I told him, I said, I would pay someone a lot of money for an app that was like iTunes, but that had really basic editing features, kind of like an Aperture, but for your audio library, with mostly a focus on managing. But then you could do things that only a teacher or a professional musician would want to do, like just trim the last 3 seconds off of an audio file non-destructively, or slow it down or speed it up without exporting it into another app, or raising it up a half step. Just stuff that. And he said to me, and I feel validated that such a great Mac developer said this. He said, that is a super interesting and compelling idea that would not make any developer any money, but it's a super interesting and compelling idea. And I felt better about myself. But
he would know.
That's a free idea. He would know. So that's a free app idea for any of you out there who want to make me basically iTunes, but with a Mac OS style sidebar that'll let me drag the tempo and the pitch higher and lower, / maybe also trim the song easily.
So you basically want to bolt Fission onto iTunes?
I kind of want iTunes, but with QuickTime or like Fission kinds of like minor editing features, but also with the AnyTune transcribing, like pretty much any transcribe app that will slow down and change the tempo. Yeah, pretty much anything like that. And then I would want to be able to like do things like it would be cool to be able to like have a master track that was never touched when you do this, but then be able to like create multiple instances of a song, like different version, like a versioning of different audio tracks. What else would I want it to do? It would be cool. So have you ever played with that DJ app?
No, I have downloaded it and it just sits in a folder on my iPad.
Fun fact, I used to be the DJ for the middle school dance back when I taught at my first teaching job, because I told them, I said, I will save you a lot of money, but you're going to need to buy me a MIDI controller that I can spin stuff on, because that would be really fun. And they're like, well, this MIDI controller is like $140 and we paid the DJ like $300 or $400. Sure, deal. So they bought me this little plastic cheap interface that works. You can plug it into a Mac or an iPad and then use the DJ app. The DJ app is pretty much a touch-first app that you take 2 songs out of your tablet's music library, and then you can like speed them up, slow them down, beat match them together, and then you have a little mixer slider where you can like seamlessly slide from one into the next, or it'll do it automatically. So what I think would be cool is over the years they've added a feature. Basically, the Apple Music and the Spotify API are now baked into the app. So if you have a Spotify subscription, you can like spin your Spotify playlist, but with all of the same features. It can like slow down and beat match and pitch match stuff from Spotify.
I'm going to play with that now.
Yeah. So that also would need to be baked into my...
As you know, I am a Spotify person.
They've also... I'm not sure. I haven't used the app for a long time, so I don't know how it works anymore, but chances are...
Definitely going to play with it, though.
Chances are it's got some of that. Yeah. Yes, DJ app. Very, very cool. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So iTunes Pro. That was my app idea. It's free for anyone who wants it.
This is DJay by a company called Algorithm.
Wait, and I am going to write a post about this. That same company has an app called Neural Mix Pro, which is expensive.
This is the one that splits out your stems.
This is how I made my soundtrack project for my middle school general music class. So you can separate the audio track, the drums, and then all other content into 3 separate channels, and then export what you want. So I basically use this to create voice tracks for famous popular songs and then export it. And you can change the tempo on export. So it'll say like, hey, Baby One More Time is like 80 2.3 beats per minute. How do you want to export it? And I can say 82 beats per minute, and then it'll like tempo align the whole export so that when I drag it into Soundtrap, I can set the tempo of the project to 82, and then any drum loop that a kid adds underneath of it should ideally...
That's very cool.
You know,
I'm going to have to play around with that. I have an app on my iPad called Transcribe Plus that claims to be able to do that, and I was not super impressed with the results that I got from it. I don't remember what track I threw at it, but it was not great.
My 3 transcribe apps that I've bounced between, my favorite one is AnyTune, which I like because it's got an iPad and a Mac version. I also like it's easy. It looks at your Apple Music library, so it's just got all of the stuff that's downloaded locally, one click away. But you can also just drag an MP3 into it and add it to your AnyTune library. It's got, in my opinion, the best keyboard shortcuts and tools for looping stuff, and it's just nice. It's a treat to use. But before that, I was using one called Transcribe, which was just made by a single developer, and very generously, like an app that I think has been getting free updates since its beginnings, which is over 10 years ago at this point. And then the one I usually recommend to music teachers is the Amazing Slowdowner, which has a free light version and is also a Mac, Windows, and iOS, and I think Android app.
So the thing that I like about Transcribe Plus is that it has this gesture-based system, so you don't have to be paying like super direct attention to the app to speed up and slow down or loop stuff. But I'll have to try AnyTune. Yeah, I just opened it up. The tune that I was trying to transcribe is "Ya Girl" Dua Lipa. Don't start now. I was trying to have it separate. That was the test I was going to use to have it separate things out because I wanted to separate the bass line, or I don't remember what it was doing. But anyway,
what a good song. Who ended up winning the Album of the Year Grammy?
You're asking the wrong nerd.
I remember thinking to myself, it better be Dua Lipa, but I know it might not be. It was Taylor Swift. I feel like it was Taylor Swift.
Maybe she got a lot of attention for those DIY homebrew things that she was doing. I mean, obviously, when Taylor Swift does things herself, it's not like when other people do things themselves. But
I swear I'm not a Taylor Swift hater, but I will not hesitate to say that she's got to be one of the most overrated pop stars that is of recent memory. I do actually really like and respect, and like with this whole thing with re-recording her albums that she doesn't own the rights to and then like re-releasing them, I think that's super awesome, and I'm so glad that someone like her is putting that in front of the public and getting attention. I just think that like her music doesn't resonate with me. Isn't that what you say when you want to be a hater? You say, this doesn't speak to me.
You can contact Robby on Twitter. He's at Robby Burns. I am not going to say a damn thing. And here's the thing, Robby. I am more comfortable talking about race and music theory than I am saying anything positive or negative about Taylor Swift.
Sure. I have strong opinions. I mean, the person who, and this will actually, do you know what will probably get me more replies than saying anything about Taylor Swift? And listen, I like Taylor Swift, just like the next person. I think she's great. I just think that, like, whenever someone gets celebrated, like, it's possible to celebrate any artist beyond how, to celebrate anyone beyond what is reasonable to expect from a human being. Like, there are lots of people who are celebrated. I think of the show Schitt's Creek, just to draw upon another popular culture example here. That show is so highly praised that when I watched it, I was like, I like this show. But this show is just like a shadow of what people told me it was going to be. Everyone behaved like this was the Bible, and I will probably get email about saying this too. I just don't really think it's that good. I think it's good. I don't think it's that good. That's how I feel about Taylor Swift. I'm doubling down. I'm going to really do it, aren't I? But no,
here, I'll save you. You know who I think is overrated is Mozart. I actually, not only do I think he's not as good as he's made up to be, I think he's actually pretty bad. I think his music is bad. He's got a couple of good operas, or maybe 1.5 good operas, and the Requiem's kind of nice, but all the chamber music is just boring. And I will die on that hill.
I think that if you had to, like, definitely paint me into a corner and make me choose, like, if you had to say, like, is Mozart underrated or overrated, I would certainly say overrated. Do you know who is appropriately rated? Is Dua Lipa. Dua Lipa gets celebrated, but not too much, and her songs kill. So catchy. No, I'll tell you what I was going to say. I sidetracked myself, but I was going to tell you about another Grammy nominee from the Grammys that is extremely overrated, and this will absolutely get me more hate mail than saying that Taylor Swift is overrated on a music education show. And that is, you'll be surprised to know, did you know that Jacob Collier was nominated?
I did know that.
Album?
I was going to guess that that's what you were going to say.
And I don't hate Jacob Collier. I just think that like the general consensus amongst musicians about him is that he's more significant than I think any musician can really be.
He's fine. His stuff's interesting, but it's fine. It's not like earth-shattering. It's fine.
I would put I would say his older stuff is the YouTube stuff, multi-instrumental stuff is novel but highly entertaining. And, I wouldn't say it is genius, but I would say it is like, really clever and innovative. I would say that like most of his albums that I've heard are lacking in any real heart or soul. Like they just sound like he's putting his ideas out there, but nothing like really grips me emotionally about any of them. And then his more recent stuff, I think that he's learning from his multiple encounters with popular musicians and is like really making his songs are like a lot more focused and a lot catchier, but still retaining sort of the density of them is like happening in the production of the songs rather than in like the composition of like how many things are going on. So I'm generally optimistic about Jacob Collier, but my goodness, do people obsess?
It's fine. The thing that it's fine. His music's fine. He's sometimes is a little like performative in his affectation in public, and that kind of I don't know. Maybe he's not being performative, and that's really just him. But I think that's one of the things that people latch onto about him, which is great. Like we should have more famous people that are weird, but I don't know. It's like you said. It's fine. We need more space for music totally that is fine.
Yep. I listen to lots of music that's fine. Totally. Speaking of music that's fine, should we do album of the week? Sweet. Do you know the band Lettuce?
Never heard of Lettuce.
They're so funky.
These artists that you've mentioned to me in a row that I've never heard of. So on last week's show, when you mentioned the artist whose name I'm not going to try to pronounce because you also didn't know how to pronounce it. I did not know that artist, and I also do not know Lettuce.
I'm pretty sure it's Owain.
Owain. Okay.
Lettuce Owain. I'm pretty sure it's Owain.
Lettuce
is a funk band.
Okay.
Yeah, funk band. Wow, they're great. I just haven't really been keeping up with them, but they did an album in 2019 that Apple Music recommended to me this morning while I was making my coffee. It's called Elevate, and the opening track is real dirty. It's like a trap thing. It's like a hip hop thing. And I'm just like, oh, this doesn't sound like Lettuce. And then the horns come in and I'm like, oh, I see what you've done here. See what you've done. And I appreciate that, borrowing some ideas from outside because they're just one of these like funky groups that is like real nice. They're not, I wouldn't say they're like Wolfpack, but they're not unlike them in that if you were at a block party at your friend's apartment in the city on a Saturday summer afternoon, you'd love to be there with some Lettuce playing in the background.
All right, that sounds good to me.
It's real tight and crispy funk music, and I like it. I like it a lot.
I will check it out. So my album of the week is a record and an artist that I know that we both have a lot of respect for, and this is an album / composition. Actually, I think is this multi-movement big band evening length concert length work called Brooklyn Babalyon by jazz composer and bandleader Darcy James Argue, performed by Darcy James Argue's Secret Society, which is, I think we can all agree, a rad name for a big band. And It is just so thoughtfully constructed on so many levels. There are, sampled sounds from the city, along with some really amazing arrangements, some very clever compositions, and some really thoughtful and creative improvisations from the band. And it just like it's just everything that's good about contemporary big band. The band's really tight. The recording quality is really, really good. You can get this record. I don't think it's available streaming anywhere. I'm happy to be wrong about that. I have it from Bandcamp, and it's recorded really, really well. Occasionally I have to give a lesson on digital music fundamentals, and one of the things I talk about in there is, what data compression is, like why we use one thing for making music and not MP3s. And the example that I give for them to listen to is I have clipped a chunk of Darcy James Argue's Secret Society playing Brooklyn Babalyon, and I have, compressed it in a bunch of different ways, and I play them back to back to back. And that's like one of the things they can hear really well. One of the reasons they can hear it is that this album happens to be recorded really, really well. And so it's this particular album is the confluence of a lot of really smart, really clever people at the top of their game in the composition, in the arranging, in the performance, in the recording, in the mixing, everything. There's nothing that I don't like about this record. And someday I hope to talk to Darcy in some capacity, and I will have to keep it inside and play it cool. But for you good listeners of the Music Ed Tech Talk podcast, I will let my fan flag fly. Brooklyn Babalyon, check it out.
This album, I know I was talking about over celebrating artists a few minutes ago. This is easily one of my favorite albums I've heard over the past 10 years.
And it's super underrated. I just can't believe more people do not know Darcy and his music and this big band.
It's just so unbelievable. I remember hearing it because for the past 7 or 8 years, I'll take NPR's top 50 albums of the year. They always seem to release that list around early December, and I'll usually make a Spotify and an Apple Music playlist out of it, and then that'll just be my, I'm going Christmas shopping to the mall, and I'll just have it playing in the car. I always learn at least 10 to 20 new albums that become part of my regular rotation, and that was the year that record came out. That was on the list, and I just remember driving to the mall to, do my favorite Saturday morning ritual of Christmas shopping and getting my white and black peppermint mocha, and that the opening of it is its own thing. But then that sort of minimalist high register piano thing kicks in from the first, because is the opening of the record considered the first movement of the
I think so
work. Okay. So whatever is the second section of the piece kicks in, and I'm just I didn't go inside. I just sat in my car and listened to
this is the neighborhood
sat in my
you're
car.
Thinking of. It starts with this
ding ding ding
yeah.
ding 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 ding.
And there's in fact that is the clip that I use for this thing, because the way the hi-hat is recorded right after that is so good, and it's so well played, but it's just so beautifully recorded.
I can't say enough good things. I'm so glad.
I will also point out, because it may be of interest to people who listen to this podcast, if you want to know what this kind of scoring looks like, if you would like to learn from how Darcy has done the arrangements, or even his scores, if you're a super deep nerd into notation and engraving, his scores are beautiful. He has published the score for this entire work. It's almost 300 pages for free online as a giant PDF, so you can just download it and study it. And if you're ever not sure what to do in a piece that you're working on, do what Darcy does. It's really good. It's very, very good.
Yeah.
Tech tip. I'll start with this one. This kind of goes hand in hand with something that I mentioned on the previous episode of using Filmic Pro to record concert stuff on my iPhone in combination with my iPad and the Filmic Pro remote app. One of the things that I think people often mistake when they are doing recordings, and we've all been doing, I think, a lot more kind of DIY recordings this year than we ever have before, is a lot of folks start by trying to figure out how to get good audio into whatever their video solution is. And I think you can do that for sure, but you'll save yourself a lot of time and hassle and probably money in buying equipment and cables and stuff, and just record them separately, because the device that is going to get you really good audio and the device that is going to get you really good video are often two very different devices. And more importantly, in the circumstance of a performance or a recording session, they often need to be in very different parts of the room. So your microphone will want to be in one place to get the best sound quality, and your camera or phone will need to be in some other place to get the best picture quality. And so what I do, and what I recommend other people do, is to record them separately and then align them together in the editing process. So the trick is, if you have a handy recorder. I have a Zoom H4n that I love dearly and have used for at least 8 years, and it's a tank. I don't see it going under anytime soon, and it records amazingly good audio for the size and the cost. If you don't have one of these things, there's a lot of devices like them in this family that will serve you really well. I think a Zoom H1 is like maybe $100 and it sounds great. So get one of those and then use your phone because it records really, really, really good quality video, and put the phone somewhere else. The trick is to make sure that you still record audio on the phone. You don't want to record a silent video. The audio is not going to be good, but that doesn't matter as long as it is of the same thing that the audio is being recorded on your separate recorder. And then in your editing application, I have, as a person who grew up doing this on Windows, I use Adobe Premiere Pro. You can also do this in Final Cut Pro. There is a feature to automatically, through some kind of voodoo magic, synchronize the audio and video tracks so that you can then synchronize them, line them up in the editor, and then remove the audio that was bad that your phone recorded and only use the audio that was good that your audio recorder recorded. And it happens, like I said, instantly and magically in Premiere and Final Cut. I can't say for sure if the same thing happens in DaVinci Resolve, which I know has grown in popularity a lot over the last few years. I would imagine I know it's at least possible to do manually in Resolve, but the idea of doing it automatically is really quite magical and very impressive to see it happen. So that's my tech tip, is when you are recording a rehearsal or a performance and you want good video and good audio, record them separately on 2 different devices and then line them up in the editing steps later.
Love it. Yeah, it's a favorite of mine. In fact, after we're done recording, I gotta tell you about. This has reminded me of the thing that I wanted to tell you later. So for me, it's got to be embedding YouTube videos in Keynote. I have moved a lot of my work to Google Docs this year because my district uses it. But Google Slides just does not cut it for me. I just, like, there's so many weird quirks that are just unacceptable to me, like dragging an image around, like the image disappears when you're, like, in the process of clicking and dragging it from one place to another. And I'm like, I'd like to see where I'm about to drop that, please. Thank you. Everything is clunky and slow and ugly. And the whole point of presentations is that they should be beautiful. And they often involve a lot of media, graphics, text, lots of things. Like, it should be fast to get my many, many graphical ideas out. So I like to use Keynote because I do believe that of the iWork suite, it is the one thing that Apple makes, in that suite that is, like, undeniably the best in class. Like, there is not a better tool for making presentations, in my opinion, than Keynote. And one thing that it was really sorely missing that Google Slides had was the ability to dump a YouTube link into it and then play it via the power of the internet. I guess it's just that because everything has been virtual this year, I guess this finally kicked Apple into gear and they made this happen. I don't know what final, or if it was just on really low on the to-do list, but I have a lot of videos. So every Friday I play a video. It's like, I call it the Friday video feature, and I play it for all my classes, and it varies in educational value, but it's usually something vaguely music related. And the easiest way for me to keep track of all the ones I've ever shown and to choose them is to just keep them in my Keynote presentation. So my Keynote file, I basically have, this is like super inefficient, I basically have one Keynote presentation that I use for almost all teaching in the public school system. It's just called Daily Agenda. And then it's got like slides that I show when they walk in, what are we going to do today? And then it's got like slides. I've just saved a lot of my most commonly used slides over the years, so they're always a click away. And yeah, I use sort of a foldering system within this presentation where I have like a single slide that says Friday video feature, and then you can sort of like nest slides within a slide and then collapse them with a little disclosure triangle. So I've got all of my Friday video features I've ever ripped off of YouTube in this. And finally now I can just copy a YouTube URL and then paste it into a slide, and then Keynote will play it straight from the web without adding any more gigabytes to my insane file size.
That's impressive. I still, because I'm broken, don't trust that to work every time, and I still download the video and embed it, and I end up with these, and I will trim it there in Keynote, and so sometimes I will download like a 2-hour concert and then trim it to 35 seconds, and then my Keynote file is like 4 gigs. Which I have plenty of, many gigabytes of Keynote files. And it's because I want the highest quality because I'm a nerd and it needs to look nice. And I also need it to be reliable and sometimes work when I don't have a super great internet connection. So, Yeah, I'm glad that this feature exists, but I don't trust it.
We talked a little bit last time about, we were talking about like Devon Think, which is like a research tool, versus like Evernote, which is also a note-taking app, but with like a lot of, you can get similar mileage out of it if you want to. And how Evernote is like a web-based thing, so it does like, you can share a URL to your note with someone and they can view it on the website. Like, to me, this Keynote feature is so cool because being able to play a video from YouTube is such a like web-centric kind of idea, but to then be able to do it in this app that behaves with like just super powerfully and responsively on my Mac, it's just a cool like best of both worlds kind of a feature.
Yeah. It definitely would be useful for the kind of thing that you're doing where you're needing to do this super frequently. Like if I was doing videos in my presentations as frequently as you are, I would need to get some religion on how big my Keynote files are. Right? If I had a Keynote deck for every music theory lecture, I give 20, 30 Keynote or theory lectures every semester. If I had a 5 gigabyte Keynote file for every one of those, that would get out of control. So I get that for sure.
Totally. Yeah.
Yes.
App of the week.
So my app of the week is an app that I have been using a little bit over the last few weeks to not only help some of my colleagues with some things, but also help my students with some things. And that is an app called Diagrams. Diagrams is how do I describe Diagrams? The thing that I use it for mostly is flowcharts. So it presents to you a grid, a dot grid that you can work from, and it has a number of kind of styles. You can kind of style different boxes of text in different ways and place them in different places and connect them. The controls are very minimal, for better and worse. The nice thing is you can't get lost deeply in the weeds of changing the font because you literally cannot change the font. You cannot use anything other than the colors that they have provided to you. You cannot move things off of the grid that they have provided to you, but you can make a really pretty solid looking flowchart in Diagrams. So for example, I know Robby has talked on the show, and I don't remember if you and I, Robby, have talked about this on the show or off the show, but we both use loopback as part of the way we route audio around to different applications on our computer, and then eventually often into Zoom or to a live stream or something like that. And so I was helping a colleague set up loopback on their computer recently, and I put together a flowchart for how I have the audio routed through various loopback things. And it's just a left to right flowchart of how audio gets into applications and then out of applications and eventually into speakers. And so that is the thing that I use. I made one recently for my students who were doing music analysis and were having difficulty deciding what language to use to describe a particular harmony. And so I put together a flowchart, like, do you see a thing that does this, or do you see a thing that does this? Well, that puts it in this category of things. And so kind of a branching set of logic there to help them decide which of these kind of various labels or descriptions would make the most sense for the harmony that they were looking at. So there are a lot of different ways that you can, I think, see something like Diagrams fitting into your life. You could do something that is more like kind of a mind map, like MindNode with it, though I think if you're doing something like that, probably a mind mapping application is a little better. But you can make some really nice, useful, practical, simple applications in Diagrams. It is, I don't know how much it costs to buy if you were just to buy it directly. It's part of the SetApp bundle, which is a very inexpensive subscription service that gets you access to a bunch of different things, but it's also, I think Diagrams is like maybe $10 or $12 to buy it outright, so it's not crazy expensive, and that's fine. It's a very simple application, and that's I should have said this up front. This is a Mac application, so check it out if you find yourself having to do these kinds of things a lot. If you do them occasionally, maybe it's not worth a dedicated application, but I get a lot of joy out of having just the right tool to make one of these really quickly.
It sounds like one of those things, like when we were talking about research-based apps last time, like some of these tools can be used for a lot of different things, or you can sort of have like, I use this app for this one thing, this app for this one thing. It seems like a really good app for just doing that one thing, like specifically a flowchart. Like I use OmniGraffle from the Omni Group, and I do make flowcharts with it, but I also make lots of other graphics with it. And it honestly, what you're describing sounds.
You told me about it, and I downloaded the trial of OmniGraffle, and I spent about 30 seconds in it before I decided this is way more than I need to do these kinds of simple graphics.
Yeah, I don't use more than like 10% of what OmniGraffle can do because it's a pretty powerful design tool. I make the most basic of things, but yeah, I definitely can see why it would be nice to not have to fiddle around with lots of buttons to get basically what is just a bunch of boxes with text in them with arrows that point to other boxes with text in them.
Right, and you can even put text on the arrows, and the arrows can go both ways, or they can have no arrow on them at all and just can be a line. And they don't have to have an arrow. You can have separate things. So I've got, there's a bunch of different things you can do.
Right on. All right, mine this week is going to be Soro for Sonos. And I am using Sonos speakers in my house. In a later episode, I plan to talk about how these do and don't interact with the HomePods in my house and the Google and Amazon things that are also scattered throughout the place. But the bottom line is this, is that a lot of music listening at our house is happening through Sonos branded speakers. And one of the things I like to do with my home tech is automate it. And one of the ways I automate it is by using the Shortcuts app on the iPhone, which basically lets me take different actions and string multiple things together and tap one time to do all of those multiple things. So, for example, in the morning, I have a scene in the Home app that turns on the lights on the main floor and disarms the alarm in the house and then opens the blinds in the living room. And I think sets the temperature of the sunroom to like 68 degrees or something. I would really like music to also play there. And I can, in the Apple Home app, set up a step of a home automation where AirPlay-enabled speakers, which Sonos speakers are AirPlay-enabled, I can have them play a specific playlist or song or album out of my Apple Music library at a specific volume on specific speakers. And that works pretty well. For reasons I'll get into at a later date, I'm having some issues with the reliability of AirPlay 2 right now in my home speaker setup, and I have been using the Sonos app, which seems to not have as many issues with grouping speakers and having them consistently stay grouped and playing, without sputtering in and out audio. So anyway, Sonos, the app, does not have any support for shortcuts. However, someone has made a nice app where all it does is it uses the Sonos API and creates a bunch of Siri shortcuts actions that expose those different things that the API can do. So things like play or pause, or select this Sonos playlist and play it on this speaker or this group, or take this speaker, and this speaker and create a group out of them and then set them to this volume level. And so I have a nice shortcut now for the morning that plays one of the cool things about Sonos is that you can link all of your music services to it. And so I have a playlist I am making in Adagio, which is the classical music streaming service. And I've got a nice playlist of a bunch of Igor Levit and Glenn Gould piano recordings that I have been exploring recently that also are the right kind of thing for me to be listening to when I first walk down the stairs with a 1-year-old in the morning. So I've got this Sonos playlist that basically, plays out of all the speakers in the main floor of the house at 20% volume. It's real nice. I like it.
Nice. I am not a Sonos boy, but that sounds like something I would totally use. We did not talk about our home tech at all, but I've HomePod mini'd up my apartment.
I'm into that. Do you, I was going to maybe throw this out there. Do you, because I'm going to do this speaker episode in probably June or July. I have like a whole real detailed list of like, here's all of the virtual assistants. Here's all of the smart speakers. Here's all of their strengths and weaknesses, how they do and don't interact with each other.
Wow.
I'm prepared to do a solo episode, but if you want to be a sounding board and like pry and ask questions that are nerdy, I'm
happy to do that. I'm not doing anything else in the summer.
Okay, that might be fun because I definitely want to get through it all. It's right now it's all hacked together, but I have seriously I feel like if I had all the time in the world to make my online writing look nice and be nice, I could totally do it at home, have a whole blog of home text.
Let's talk about it after you wrap the whatever is coming up at the end here.
Oh, are we not done?
Oh, okay. I thought you were gonna. You don't do any of the post recording stuff now.
Oh no,
okay,
I'll do it later.
Cool. Should I stop recording?
I guess so. Yeah. Thanks for coming.
That was great. That was fun.
I'm Robby Burns. Thanks for listening to Music Ed Tech Talk. You can find the show's page, show notes for the episode, and my blog at musicedtechtalk.com. You can subscribe to blog posts through an RSS app of your choice, and you can subscribe to the podcast in the podcast app of your choice. You can now get blog posts delivered right into your email inbox once a week. You only get an email if I actually post that week. Please rate and review this show in the Apple Podcasts app if you use it, or if you don't. It absolutely helps. Word of mouth is helpful too, so please spread the word about the show. You can learn more about my music and teaching career at robbyburns.com. I'm on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Pinterest, all of the places at Robby Burns. See you next time.